You know, when I get introduced at events like this, I sometimes think someone is just going to refer to me as like the maven of the MBTA, not the Secretary of Transportation. That would be understandable since a lot of my time is spent on the T. But it's wonderful this morning to be with a group that, like Mass DOT itself, represents and cares about all the parts of the state and all our modes of transportation. So as Pat noted in his kind introduction, I've been secretary now for just over a year. What I want to do this morning is briefly recap some of what we've been able to accomplish in that time, and then before I welcome your questions, I want to talk about something that we presented to both the Mass DOT Board and the MBTA Fiscal and Management Control Board just a couple of days ago, and that will affect everyone in this room, which is the first fully integrated Mass DOT MBTA 5-year capital investment program, one that focuses on improving the reliability of our statewide transportation system. We think of this kind of investment, it's a $14.3 billion plan over 5 years, as the kind of public policy that, as Rick said in his opening remarks, creates economic opportunity for the citizens of the Commonwealth. With perhaps one final reminder on the way that winter in Massachusetts remains a very real challenge even as the calendar turns to spring, I wanted to start by turning the clock back to this time last year. Last winter did not, of course, cause the MBTA's chronic problems, many of which date back not only years but decades. Old equipment was part of the problem, but so too was the lack of proper management and fiscal oversight. The MBTA's operating budget was not so much being mismanaged as being unmanaged. And so whenever the legislature provided the MBTA with additional financial support, which it did frequently, those resources went into a growing operating budget, despite the fact that for much of that time, ridership growth was either flat or modest. And the capital budget was more of a plan than a budget, with insufficient spending on maintenance and a lot of kicking the can down the road on the need to invest in the basics: tracks, signal, power, and modern new vehicles. A lot has changed in the past year. Even more is changing literally every day, in part due to efforts by groups such as the Fix RT Coalition. I'd also like to acknowledge the support we have had from our friends and colleagues in the legislature. With the passage, so we got, the Fiscal and Management Control Board was created as of July 1st last year. And they're going to talk about the amazing role that they've played. But the reason that we have been seeing the kind of operating budget discipline, improved workforce availability, reduced overtime, and improved performance on both the core bus and transit system and on the commuter rail really starts with leadership. And we have quietly, not everyone realizes this, completely changed over the leadership at the MBTA. Compared to about a year ago, we have a new general manager, a chief administrator for the first time, a new chief operating officer, chief financial officer, chief procurement officer, and chief technology officer. I will note we continue to look all the time for new talent to turn around and reinvigorate the T, so please, seriously, let me know if you know of any people, senior or middle managers, entry-level folks in almost any discipline, who are looking for all the challenges of being part of a turnaround without any of the private sector compensation. We're getting some amazing people and who are taking pay cuts, and it is because they actually use the T, care about the T, and want to be part of the team that is going to turn it around, that is turning it around. So clearly one big part of the change has been the creation of the Control Board, with, of course, support from our partners in the legislature. In a piece last week entitled "Hail to the T's Control Board," Bruce Moll of Commonwealth Magazine wrote, "The 5 members of the MBTA's Fiscal Management and Control Board are the most intriguing people in state government right now. They work long hours for no pay and take lots of abuse at their public meetings, yet they refuse to take the easy way out. I couldn't agree more. The Control Board has met 3 or 4 times every month since it was sworn in last July, so frequently that staff refers to weeks without meetings as bye-weeks. Each meeting starts with public comment, and given high-profile issues such as the elimination of late-night service, fare increases, new commuter rail schedules, and the Green Line extension, Many weeks, the public comments run for an hour or more, and that's with everyone limited to 2 minutes. And then there's the control board's insistence on data-driven decision-making and transparency, with monthly and even weekly updates on everything from on-time performance to absenteeism and overtime to operating budget performance. Every weekday morning, MBTA operations staff now put out a detailed report on the previous day's performance for the bus and rapid transit systems. Even as we await the delivery of new red and orange line cars, still several years away, new maintenance protocols mean that more of the aging fleet is actually available for daily service, and as a result, on-time performance is getting better and more consistent. For example, the red line is a huge focus, and our engineering and maintenance folks have been able to do enough maintenance work to actually increase the number of trains in the morning schedule, which is reducing crowding and increasing on-time performance. Our commuter rail operator, Keola's Commuter Services, provides a similar daily report. We negotiated what we called a service improvement plan with them, which ran from August to December of last year. It went beyond the contract requirements and focused them on not just overall performance, they met the contractual performance requirements, but actually on peak period performance and line-by-line performance. In general, we still have some lines that are a problem, but in general, commuter rail performance is up and penalties are down. And while the winter, so far, has been relatively easy, I am confident that the T was, in fact, prepared to handle far worse. But internal performance reporting and management is only part of the story. The weekly online posting of performance data will be replaced before the end of this month with a new online dashboard. This is a picture of what it will look like. That will contain information not only on performance, but on 4 key areas: on-time performance, financial performance, ridership, and, yes, customer satisfaction, based on data gleaned from a panel of MBTA riders who are now providing us with monthly feedback on how well we're doing. Detailed information by service line, historical data will be just clicks away for anyone who's interested in digging in. And as I said, we'll get that online before the end of the month. So transparency, accountability, performance really have become the watchwords at the MBTA. One of the most remarkable signs of real change at the T can be seen in the financials that are regularly reported on at the control board meetings. After years of growing budget deficits, which were actually viewed as inevitable, just this week the control board approved an operating budget for fiscal 17 that uses less than half of the additional contract assistance that has been the MBTA's lifeline for years to close a shrinking structural deficit. Let's be clear, the T will always need substantial public subsidy. But, and next year, fiscal 17, the guaranteed subsidy that the T has been receiving since 2000, when forward funding law was enacted, will rise above $1 billion for the first time. So that means that the T is guaranteed, bankable, bondable, guaranteed $1 billion a year. But for years now, the legislature has provided the T with tens of millions of dollars above the base revenue amount or the statutory guarantee, which have gone exclusively towards addressing the operating budget because of the structural deficit in the operating budget. This money comes from something called the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, which is filled up with gasoline taxes and registry fees and should be supporting much-needed increases in the capital budget. But the steady focus on internal cost controls by our new leadership team and the control board, including reducing overtime and absenteeism, and increasing the revenues that we generate ourselves from parking, advertising, real estate deals, means that the T isn't just balancing its budget, it's now actually able to divert money from the operating budget into critical repairs of the system in ways that will directly improve service for our customers. In recent weeks, the control board has directed $25 million from the current fiscal year savings and the entire amount that will be raised by the fare increase that is coming on July 1st toward a pay-go performance and reliability capital fund that will be used, for example, to upgrade Green Line signals that predate World War I. Some might argue that there's no point in working so hard to generate pay-go capital at the T because the T can't spend the capital dollars that are already available. The expert panel convened by Governor Baker last year did in fact find that the MBTA was having substantial challenges in moving capital dollars out the door. But General Manager Frank DePaula and his team have been working on that problem too, and real progress is being made. Tracking capital spending on a week-by-week basis, something that was not even being tracked quarterly before. In fiscal 15, the MBTA was able to spend nearly $740 million, and the goal for fiscal 16 is $800 million. And as I'll discuss in a moment, we're working towards an agency that can effectively invest more than $1 billion every year in capital maintenance and other capital projects. But before talking more about our plans for capital spending, let's turn back to the operating budget for one last moment. In its first report to the legislature last September, the Control Board provided a baseline pro forma for 5 years that predicted large and growing structural deficits in the operating budget, shown here as the red line. With an intensive focus on increasing own source revenues and controlling operating costs, the T has already bent that curve. This is just in the 6 months since September. The preliminary operating budget approved by the Control Board last week projects a structural deficit only 1/3 the size that the Control Board had predicted only 3 months ago. Not $240 million, but $80 million. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to be done. But the MBTA is on a new course. With new leadership, a dedicated volunteer board willing to make tough choices, and a commitment to customer service, operating performance, transparency, and accountability that I believe will begin to show even more visible results where it matters the most, in the commutes and trips that our riders experience daily. It's important to remember, however, that aging assets and billions of dollars in deferred maintenance are not unique to the MBTA. Since I actually am Secretary of Transportation and not MBTA maven, I'm responsible not only for the T, but for our Highway Division, which is responsible in turn for the Commonwealth's highest volume roadways and bridges, as well as the Registry of Motor Vehicles, where new procedures and physical changes at registry branches across the state have greatly improved the customer experience, with more changes still to come. So I do want to spend a few moments talking about how we fix not only the T, but our entire statewide transportation system by reinventing the way we create and implement our capital investment plans. One thing that is unique about my transportation agencies is that the combined capital budget of the T and Mass DOT is roughly the same size as their combined operating budget. Most state agencies have much bigger operating budgets than capital budgets. So in addition to providing great service, one of the most important things these agencies do is make capital investments that are critical for the state's economy and the prosperity of our cities and towns. On Wednesday, both the MBTA Control Board and the Mass DOT Board met jointly to review a preliminary draft of an integrated statewide $14.3 billion 5-year capital plan aimed at significantly improving the reliability of the Commonwealth's existing transportation system to better serve millions of people across the state and to support the economy that depends on it. You may have heard that the T has a $7.4 billion deferred maintenance backlog, which is daunting given that the replacement value of the T's asset totals only about $24 billion. Few people, however, understand that our roadways and bridges similarly suffer from underinvestment in basic maintenance. This plan, therefore, takes a balanced approach, investing nearly equally in the T and in our roads and bridges statewide. We have not yet been able to calculate a deferred maintenance backlog number that is analogous to the T's state of good repair backlog, but we did create the first asset management report ever submitted to the legislature, although it has been required by law for some time. We submitted it in January, and that report, just to give you a sense, calculated that the replacement value of roads owed by Mass DOT is $22.5 billion, with another $10.7 billion for the state's roughly 5,000 bridges. So if you add up the T, the roads and bridges, and you sort of round up for all the other things we own, guardrails and sidewalks and salt depots, you know, we have probably $75 billion in assets, right? And if you have $75 billion in assets and you just were to create a sinking fund to do sort of basic maintenance, you would be should be spending billions of dollars a year, but we don't work that way. So what we needed to do was reinvent capital planning to decide how we invest in which assets. The plan that I talked to you about has been developed very differently than what was done in the past. For one thing, it's the first time that the MBTA and MassDOT have produced a fully integrated capital plan. And unlike past practice, the plan reforms the capital planning process in order to achieve system-wide priorities as opposed to being built up from a long list of projects. The three priorities, in priority order, are number 1, reliability, number 2, modernization, and number 3, expansion. These priorities form the foundation of not only this capital plan, but of our vision for MassDOT and the T, a vision where Massachusetts residents can get where they are going reliably and safely, and so can goods, not just people. Under this strategy, about 60% of the $14.3 billion, or $8.7 billion, will go to the number 1 priority, which is maintaining and improving the overall condition and therefore reliability of our transportation system. Another roughly 20% will go to modernization programs to make the system safer, more accessible, and to accommodate current or anticipated growth. How will that money be spent? Let's take one final moment before turning to questions to look at what the plan proposes to do about all of the roads with pavement in poor condition and all of our structurally deficient bridges. Every day in Massachusetts, you and I and everyone else drives 130 million miles a day. All roads are not created equal when it comes to vehicle miles traveled. MassDOT only owns about 30% of the lane miles of roads in the Commonwealth. Cities and towns own the other 87%. But our 13% of the roads carry 58% of the traffic. Some of those roads are our interstates. Interstate lane miles represent only 4.5% of statewide inventory, but move 33% of the traffic. The good news is that our interstate roads are in relatively good shape. 81% of the pavement, which is evaluated every other year, is currently rated in good or excellent condition. The problem is with our non-interstate roads. Today, only 64% of state-owned non-interstate roadways are in good or excellent condition. And we did some modeling with our new asset management software. If we continue to spend on non-interstate pavement what we have been spending, in 5 years, it will drop from 64% in good or excellent condition to 30% in 5 years. Now that we have that data, we can act on it. So the proposed plan moderates spending on interstate pavement while increasing spending on non-interstate pavement by 60% above historic levels. Okay, what about bridges? You may know that we are coming to the end of an 8-year accelerated bridge program that taught MassDOT how to fix bridges faster and more cost effectively and tackled 5 mega projects like the Fore River Bridge and the Longfellow Bridge. But if we don't invest in fixing the rest of the Commonwealth's structurally deficient bridges, the number of such bridges will begin to increase again, and soon. That's why the proposed plan invests $2 billion in bridges over the next 5 years. At that spending level, $400 million a year. If we can keep it up for 10 years, fewer than 2% of the bridges in the Commonwealth will be structurally deficient. And as you know, better roads and bridges mean a more reliable transportation system. So finally, what about the MBTA's multi-billion-dollar deferred maintenance challenge? The Control Board has calculated that the MBTA needs to increase spending, just spending on the state of good repair, not total spending, which is what I showed you before, to $765 million annually. So the 5-year plan ramps the T up to that investment level by fiscal 18 and provides sufficient resources with no new revenue needed to keep spending on that level for the remainder of the plan period. The proposed MBTA investments prioritize repairing and upgrading the core system, which is now unable to meet either the needs or expectations of our users. Over $3.7 billion will be used to replace and rehabilitate the T's aging infrastructure, moving it closer to what is known as a state of good repair. $1 billion will go to track, signal, and power improvements. The historic spend rate on signals, which are responsible for 1/3 of all reliability impediments, was $40 million a year. Another $1.6 billion is set to purchase new buses and rail vehicles. We have over $1.5 billion of vehicles on order for the Red Line, Green Line, Orange Line, and bus fleet. This emphasis on restoring our existing assets will mean fewer shiny new projects, but it will mean increased reliability for Massachusetts residents and for businesses such as yours that depend on our state's transportation system to move both workers and goods. So in closing, let me just tell you one thing about process that I want all of you to know and to help us with. Part of the process for developing this draft capital investment plan began with what we called Capital Conversations, a series of 16 public forums across the Commonwealth to learn about what elected officials, residents, and businessmen wanted from the MBTA and Mass DOT investments. Many of the folks we spoke to did emphasize the need to fix what we already have, so that's what the proposed plan will do. Once the two boards refine the plan, they will release a public draft in April, and we'll have another round of capital conversations. I'm sure we'll hear about some of the projects that aren't in the plan. So if you agree with me that we need to focus first and foremost on reliability and on fixing and modernizing the transit, road, and bridge assets we have and not allowing them to deteriorate, I hope that you will participate in that process. Actually, if you don't agree with me, I still hope you'll participate in that process. I also hope that through AIM and through your individual companies, you will continue to be an active participant not only in capital planning, but more broadly in supporting the Baker-Polito administration's efforts to fix the MBTA and to set the Commonwealth on the path to a better transportation future. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.